welcome back to my channel, Finding Balance with Kelly. I'm a nutritionist and stress coach. I like to work with mamas and other women and help them find balance in their lives. Today is a really exciting and special day because I've been intending to share this with you since it happened, and that is my birth story. And because I had Finn, my son, in the COVID pandemic, I have really kind of gone through both birth as well as my postpartum period in complete isolation or quarantine. I think that makes my story a little bit unique, but I was actually very lucky that even with all of this, I was able to have mostly the birth that I was hoping for. What we had wanted for our labor and delivery was a water birth at the Ottawa Birth Centre. So I was open to having a home birth. But I did not really like the idea considering a hospital is more than 5 or 10 minutes away. I think our closest hospital is about 15, so I wasn't comfortable if something were to happen. Being a first-time mom, not really sure exactly how it's going to go. So the Ottawa Birth Centre was my best choice. The only concern was that was about 30 to 40 minutes away from us without traffic. So without further ado, let's get started. If you haven't been following along, I went to 41 plus 5 days with Finn. That means I was 41 weeks and 5 days pregnant when I had Finn. I was about 12 days overdue, which is quite long for most people, but it is pretty typical for a first-time mom to go about 41 plus 3 overdue. So I wasn't super far off from the norm if you are looking at births without inductions. And because I was so overdue, my midwife started to kind of say to me, if you go over 42 weeks, it's a good idea to get induced. I wanted to start looking at natural methods of induction. So I wasn't comfortable going to the hospital and being induced with synthetics like Pitocin. I wanted to be exploring what I could do to put my body into labor naturally. I started with stretch and sweeps. So I went into labor on the Monday. I had my first one on the Saturday. That didn't really do too much. It kind of helped to loosen things up a little bit, but it didn't put me into labor at all. I had my second one on the Monday. I went into labor that day. Went into my midwife's office. She did a very aggressive stretch and sweep, and far more painful than the first one and far more intense. She said, go for a walk. Go for a long walk and then use your breast pump to help nipple stimulation. Another thing that helps to promote oxytocin, which can help to promote contractions. As soon as I had the stretch and sweep, I actually started feeling contractions. They were light. They were kind of completely variable. So I decided to go for an hour-long walk. Of course, as I was walking, it started to pour rain. So here I am walking in the pouring rain for an hour, nowhere to go. I'm exhausted when I get home, but contractions were continuing. Then I decided to use my breast pump. I used that for a little bit to help to continue stimulation of contractions, and they continued. So they continued into the night. I was seeing sort of every 8, every 10 minutes, sometimes every 5 minutes, but the pattern was not there. So I decided to go to sleep. So I went to bed at 9, and I woke up around 11:30. My plan was to go to bed early so that I could wake up early in case the contractions completely fizzled out. And if they did, I was going to take castor oil. Now, castor oil is extremely potent. And what it does is it kind of irritates your bowels, and it can help to contribute to uterine contractions by kind of that irritation of the bowels, which is a part of the reason why most people don't recommend it unless you're quite desperate. And if you want to use it, you should speak to your healthcare practitioner before you just go ahead and start using it, because it can be pretty intense. But I ended up waking up at 11:30 in the middle of the night anyways with contractions that were close enough together between kind of the 8 and the 5 minute mark, but we're starting to get a little bit painful. So I knew this was going to be the real deal. I decided to draw myself a bath, and I kind of went in and labored in the tub for a little while, which was really relaxing. And the contractions started to get closer together. I was experiencing contractions from all over the place, 5 minutes apart, 8 minutes apart, and then some would hit 2 minutes apart. And then I'd go back to that same kind of pattern of 5 minutes or 8 minutes apart, and then back to 2 and 3 minutes apart. So I was having these irregular contractions, but there was still a pattern within them. I ended up laboring in the tub until a point where I didn't know if I could kind of continue. That was when I called my doula. So I called her around 2 in the middle of the morning, and she was waiting my call because I'd been texting her all day and then throughout the evening about how I was feeling. I called her around 2. She came to my place, and while I was waiting for her to get here, I got out of the tub, woke up Mike, and told him we need to get downstairs because I'm not sure I can do stairs as I get further and further into these contractions. So we got everything we needed. We went downstairs, and I started laboring on my couch in my living room. My favorite position for labor was really on all fours. I actually don't think I changed positions at all the entire labor. I was on all fours mostly in my tub. I was on all fours on my couch. I was on all fours throughout most of my labor, and that was just where I was comfortable, and it was a good position for the baby. So we made it downstairs, started laboring on the couch a little bit. My doula was on her way, but I started to notice the contractions were getting far more intense and far more painful, and they were starting to get closer and closer together. So instead of that sort of 8-minute apart, we started to see 5 minutes apart more so, and then some 3 and some 2. So I decided to call my midwife because I thought this would probably be a good opportunity to get checked and make sure everything was okay and that I wasn't too far along. That was my concern, was that I was going to be too far along and that I wasn't going to be able to have the birth center birth that I wanted, or I was going to get stuck at home. The doula arrived, so my doula friend Jen, she arrived and she was able to help me kind of work through some contractions. She got me the TENS machine, which was friggin' fantastic. I would recommend the TENS machine to anybody who is experiencing labor pains. That is such a phenomenal way to get your mind away from the pain of labor. It's distracting enough that you focus more on the TENS than you do on the actual contraction when it happens, which is amazing. Once she got me that, I started to feel nauseous, so I had asked them to get me something to throw up in because I was gonna be sick, and I was, but fortunately that was the only time I was sick the entire labor, which was really nice because I did not want to be that person who was throwing up the whole time. Then shortly after, my midwife Sarah, she arrived at my house and she came in to check me. She listened to a few contractions when we were on the phone, and she did think that it was probably a good idea for her to come check. So when she did come check me, she told me I was 3.5 centimeters dilated. So I wasn't even dilated enough to make it to the birth center yet, which was so frustrating because I had been experiencing these intense contractions for at least 3 to 5 hours, and I was experiencing between 5 to 3 to 2 minutes apart in each of these contractions, which was super frustrating, and to me that sounds like active labor. But I think because they weren't consistent, they weren't entirely active labor contractions. After my midwife checked me, she decided to give me a combination of Benadryl and Gravol through an injection. She felt that I needed to sleep in order to have the best labor possible. She could tell that I was getting to the point where I was having a harder time managing it, so she wanted me to have a little bit of rest so that I could help to manage the contractions better as I got deeper into active labor and then transition. She gave me this injection and she told me I would be drowsy within minutes, but she also told me to get something in my body while I could so that I could kind of digest it while I was sleeping and not have to worry about it in active labor so that I could have some energy. I went to make a smoothie and I couldn't do it myself. I had to walk Mike through the whole smoothie making process. He made me one. It was really delicious, but I couldn't eat it. I had absolutely zero appetite for it. I made my way back up the stairs, which was not what I wanted to do. Remember, I wanted to do as much laboring on the ground floor to avoid stairs, but I had to go back upstairs to bed because I was about to pass out. From about 3 until 5:30 or so, I ended up continuing to contract, but because I was in this drowsy state, I wasn't really conscious of it. I remember being aware that the contractions were happening in bed, but not really realizing it. And the entire time I was vocalizing my contractions. So I was moaning and groaning through them. I was breathing deeply through them, but I was being extremely vocal. I don't really know how I didn't keep myself awake. It was this weird labor, la-la state, and I was just knocked out from the drugs, so I didn't really feel much, even though I was vocalizing it. But then as I got closer to about 6 o'clock in the morning, I was in a lot of pain. I started crying towards the end of my contractions because I was just so done with them. I was ready to just call my midwife and tell her to meet us at the hospital because I was done with being unmedicated. I wanted an epidural. I didn't know how much longer it was going to go, and I was running out of steam. Fortunately, my doula was just in the other room near us, and she was listening to my contractions, and she thought they were getting more intense and closer together. She felt it was a good time to call the midwife back and reassess what we were going to do. When I called my midwife, I was, like I said, ready to tell her to throw in the towel and go to the hospital, even knowing that the hospitals and with COVID and all the outbreaks, knowing that they were not the ideal place to have a birth. We were starting to have people who were diagnosed, but also if I was to end up having a C-section or something were to happen, if he was to be allowed into my room, he wasn't allowed to leave my room again. He would have had to stay with me for the entire probably 2 days recovery time, unless it had ended up being a relatively smooth birth and I could have gone home pretty quickly. It was a total toss-up. We didn't know what to expect, so that was why the birth center was super important for us. Not only that, but because I wanted originally an unmedicated birth. But at this point, I was just ready to throw it all in and say, screw it, give me the epidural. We called my midwife back and reported that my contractions were getting closer together and they were becoming a bit more regular, more like the 4 minutes apart, but I was starting to experience things like double peaks. So I would have contractions that would be back to back. So, you kind of come out of the contraction and then another would start. And typically that doesn't happen until you're in transition. And so it was important for me to get a hold of her to kind of tell her, like, I need to go to the hospital now. When she finally answered, she told me, you know, it would be best if I went to the birth center so she could check me again, be 100% sure that I could get admitted. So, you know, 100% sure that I had moved from 3.5 centimeters into the 4, 5, 6 range, which is where they admit you to the hospital or the birth center. And she said at that point, once we knew what my body was doing, I could make the call if I wanted to go to the hospital from there, which was only 10 minutes away, or if I wanted to stay at the birth center and have the original birth that I had planned for. In my head, I was doing a bunch of quick mental math. Like, if I had to go to the hospital, I knew that I would still need to be admitted, I'd still need to get fluids, and then I could get the epidural. So if I was in transition, then I was probably not going to make the epidural. So then I decided, okay, I was going to go to the birth center and she was going to tell me exactly where I was. And if I was not very far along, then I would make the call that I had the time to go to the hospital. If not, I was going to have the baby at the birth center. Done. The journey to the birth center wasn't so bad. We had a very straight drive, like all highway. Like I think we drove on like 3 roads to get there. Even though it was long, it was all highway. It was smooth driving. I had contractions in the car, but they weren't as horrendous as most people's car contraction stories are. I was lucky, but it did hurt going down the stairs. I'm pretty sure I had a contraction like every 2 stairs going down my staircase, which is right here, getting to the car to go to the birth center. It was horrible. The whole point of me being on the ground floor so I could easily leave, that was well thought out. But of course, things changed. When I arrived at the birth center, unfortunately, that was when I had to part with my doula. This was where COVID really threw a wrench in my birth plan. I had hired a doula to help me through to the end, which was the whole point of her being there, but unfortunately, she wasn't allowed in the birth center, or she wouldn't have been allowed in the hospital either. We were only allowed one support person. That ended up being my husband. Unfortunately, we had to say bye, and because I was in a good place, we decided not to call her. She did offer for us to be on the phone with her so she could help coach through, but we felt we were in a pretty good place and we would let her know what was going on and what was happening. We ended up coming into the birth center. The midwife checked me and I was about 7 centimeters dilated, which meant I was almost kind of going into that transition period, which was music to my ears. I ended up deciding to stay at the birth center and then I went into the tub right away. She had it ready for me. It's like she knew I was going to stay as soon as I got there, which was very right. And I got in the tub. I felt amazing. So what the tub does is it helps to relax you in between those contractions. While the contractions are not necessarily a lot easier, you're feeling relaxed in between. I was so relaxed that I was going in and out of kind of this daze, half sleeping while I was experiencing contractions, which was pretty cool. And when one would come, Mike would help me. And my coping mechanism was to moan through them and to breathe and to count. So I counted to 10. I moaned through and then I repeated. I took a deep breath in, counted to 10 and moaned through it. And I was tapping with my hand through the 10. So he was helping me with tapping rhythm. He was helping me just hold my hand and be there for me, which was all I ever needed. But then I started to feel a bit of a shift. My contractions were double and triple peaking. I was having very little breaks in between them, but I didn't really remember it too much because I was still in this daze that the tub provided, which was really awesome. What I did start to feel was when my midwife checked me, she told me I was about 10 centimeters and that I was probably going to start feeling some movement down. I felt that. That I actually found quite painful, and I was surprised because most people said once you start pushing, you don't really feel the pain. I was pushing into a lot of pain and it was continuing to be painful through my pushes. I ended up getting to the point where I was telling the midwife, like, get this baby out of me, I can't do this anymore, you know, all those typical things, and that was all happening when I was pushing. I was like, get this thing out. She told me to tell her when I was feeling bearing down that I couldn't control, and I started to feel that pretty quickly. She called another midwife to come in. It was going to take her about half an hour to get to the clinic. About 15 minutes later, she started to see that I was getting quite close, and so I heard her in the background calling back the midwife asking how far she is. She's about 5 minutes away, so good. But then I'm telling her, like, he's coming. It all happened really fast. My water broke and then I really felt like he was coming. So she checked me and she's like, oh my God, we need another midwife in now. In the birth center, there's also a clinic. There was a midwife in clinic and she was able to call her out to support for the birth. As I'm birthing my baby, I got another midwife coming in from clinic, and then I have another midwife who comes in just at the last, and now he's awake. So hang on one second. As I was pushing, I of course felt the ring of fire, but I pushed through that. I knew it was gonna hurt. I knew it was gonna be a lot. I knew it was gonna hurt. It wasn't as bad as I kind of expected, but then as he was coming out, it turns out he had his fist up by his head and she suspects that he might have had his other fist up by his head too, just the way he came out, and he had his cord wrapped around him a few times. So they had to kind of deal with that before they were able to give him to me. I was mostly just overwhelmed with all the feelings and all of the sensations that were happening, and just the fact that, like, oh my god, I just did that, which was the craziest thing ever. It was the craziest thing that I had ever done. Very quickly after that, we made our way. They assessed me, they did everything, they assessed him. He was perfect. I was a little bit more rough. I had some tearing. I had 3 second-degree tears, and some of them were because of his nuchal hand, which was up by his head. So thank you, baby, for ruining that for me. Everything was great. We ended up leaving the birth center about 3 hours later, which was fantastic. We did not need a lot of time there because everything went really smooth. So that was really my birth story. The only thing that really got thrown off by COVID was basically the doula. But also, when I was debating going to the hospital, it's funny that the COVID and the fears and everything going on was all completely out of my mind. All I wanted was pain relief, and I'm just very fortunate for my midwife who had caught on to that kind of fear, and she not manipulated, but she knew what was going on. So she convinced me that going to the birth center was probably a good idea. We were able to have an amazing golden hour just after he was born. So he was put on my chest right away. Then he was given to Mike so I could get out of the tub, and then I got him back. He latched right away. His latch was great. We had a really nice after experience too, which was awesome. The midwives were amazing. I went with Community Midwives in Ottawa. So if you're in Ottawa and you're looking for a midwife group, they're great. They have the ability to birth at the birth center, but also the Civic is their backup hospital. And so for all the information for you guys, Finn was born on March 31st. So he basically just barely met being a March baby, which was something I was hoping he would be because his due date was in March. He ended up being 21 inches long and 8 pounds, 12 ounces. He had a full head of hair, which he, as you can see, is losing now. And this is Finn. Hey, baby. You say hi. So he is now 6 weeks old. So I'm filming this a little bit late, but I'm gonna go take care of this little guy. And so thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or if you'd like to know more, please feel free to send me a message. Check me out on Instagram, on my blog. You can write a comment. I'll get back to you. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and hope you guys have an awesome day.